Hello, and welcome to the Redline Book Festival. My name is Mark Ward, and I am the festival programmer for Redline. The festival is brought to you by South Dublin Libraries and Arts. I'm delighted to introduce Sinéad Morrissey, who will be reading from her selected poems, Found Architecture. Sinéad is an acclaimed Irish poet, author of 6 collections, and has received the T.S. Eliot Prize and the Patrick Kavanagh Poetry Award, amongst many others. Sinéad is a professor of creative writing at Newcastle University and will be joining us this evening from Northumberland. Please welcome Sinéad Morrissey.
Hello everyone, my name is Sinéad Morrissey and I'm absolutely delighted to have been invited to read as part of this year's Redline Festival. I'm going to read from my new selected poems which came out earlier this year, Found Architecture, which represents all 6 of my collections that I've written over the last quarter of a century. It's got this gorgeous line drawing by Mara Belmas on the cover, and I'm so delighted. I'm so delighted with this selection and to have so much of my work put together in this way. So I'm going to read 2 poems from each of the 6 books, and I'm going to start with my first collection. There was Fire in Vancouver, which came out when I was very young, and I'd like to start with the first poem, which brings me back to my childhood days in Belfast with my radical parents attending a Communist Party fundraiser. Among communists. I remember smoke and faces that I knew and the fact that I got in free. My mother taking money by the half-collapsed sink. Posters proclaiming an evening of Brecht and subtitled, Bring Your Own Drink. Too much conviction to see through. And this is going back to the days of the Troubles, of course, when the Europa Hotel, before the conflict in former Yugoslavia, was the most bombed building in Europe. Europa Hotel. It's a hard truth to have to take in the face. You wake up one morning with your windows round your ankles and your forehead billowing smoke, your view impaired for another fortnight of the green hills they shatter you for. For many years, I've had a recurring dream, and the recurring dream is I'm trying to get into the sea to swim, but I can't. So either the tide rolls away, or the sea level suddenly drops, or the sea just moves further and further back as I'm trying to walk towards it. And I didn't know what this dream meant. And then I realized that the sea was a symbol for me of language and of creativity and inspiration. So to be within the element of the sea is to be inside the element of language. And I wasn't able to write for a long time when I was in my middle 20s. And so I wrote a poem which is about the sea retreating and the idea that there is a kind of faith that it will come back. Rock pool. These creatures live on faith that the greater sea, whose roaring pounds and permeates the rock pool's floor, the rock pool's leather-bound sanctuary, will once again rise up to the little sea, and that their salts will mingle and hold. My arm submerged is a eucalyptus tree in an 18th century birthing room, lurid and luminous. How the women who have blocked the keyholes and the door jambs with rags and snuffed the candles scurry. They move as suddenly as travelling specks of eyes that haunt vision. One look at them and they're gone, but they still look on. Water pours from the raised fringe of green gauze like generosity. The pool collects itself again. These creatures have lodged themselves on the tallest ridge of the law of averages, the law of probability, and on the memory of what their ancestors learned and saw as unswayably as they swell in crevices and suck rocks. Life flourishes on belief. It announces quietly how, one day or night, the sea will arrive and save them from the starfish-seeking children and evaporation. How they would shine in a parable on the return of Christ. How they would give women succor, those who also hang on for the moon to peak and for water to answer. A stick breaks but does not break as it enters the mirror. When I bend to the surface, the room under water clouds and furrows with breath, like a door closing over. I am not theirs, and they will not give me up. I lived in Japan for a couple of years after university, sort of in my middle 20s, and this is a poem about the different kind of aspects of Japanese religion and kind of how enticing they were to me, but how I really didn't understand them. And at the end of the poem, there's a figure, Nagasawa Sensei, who was a larger-than-life character. He was marvellous. He was my supervisor in the school where I worked, and he did many different jobs, and I loved him. And so this poem is really a homage to him. Between here and there. No one seems sure of the reason why aprons are tied to the necks of stone babies in temples. The priest says, honor. The guide to Kyoto City mentions cold on their journey away from us to the heaven for children. I look at them squatting in Buddha reflection, wrapped up to the throat in teddy bears and trains. There's a graveyard for miscarriages under Ikeda Mountain, as stark as a bone field. No flowers, tangerine, sake, or aprons, but a basin of stone bodies in two parts. Square body, round head. Like Oriental soldiers contained by a wall, they would go walking, spill over with all the energy for life that fell out of them too soon. Except that even in stone, some bodies have opened, loose balls in the basin where heads have rolled. Inside the biggest wooden building in the world sits Japan's greatest Buddha, one hand raised as a stop sign to evil. The other is flat, flat with comfort and promise, flat enough for all of us to nuzzle his thumb. Lily flower opened. His crossing was a falling into light. Fall with me, he says, and you'll be raised to the heights of the roof of the biggest wooden building in the world. When Nagasawa visits the House of the Dead, he leaves at the door his camera and tripod, his champion karaoke voice, his miracle foot massage, his classroom dynamics, his rock-hard atheism, and slips onto the tatami of the prayer room as the man who can chant any you-name-it soul between here and Ogaki to paradise. So this is a kind of historical monologue poem, and it's in the voice of a royalist woman during the English Civil War. The royalist side has lost, and Cromwell is in power. But this is a woman who's been put into a scold's bridle. I'd kind of come across this monstrous contraption of a scold's bridle. And so my response was to write this poem. So it's a poem about being silenced and speech. So flight. There he saw one on Bridlestone drove through the streets by an officer of the same corporation, holding a rope in his hand, the other end fastened to an engine called the Branks, which is like a crown, being of iron with a great gag or tongue of iron, and that is the punishment which magistrates do inflict upon chiding and scolding women, and he hath often seen the like done to others. England's grievance discovered, 1655. After the murder of our blessed martyr, after the slaughter of the rout at Worcester, his son, the rightful king, went into hiding, here as a woodcutter, there as a serving man, disguising the telltale milk white of his skin by the dye of rotted walnuts. 1651, the year of our Lord that my husband bridled me, and I have learned to hold my tongue in company. He could not remain unrecognised for long. Majesty being so natural unto him, it soon shone forth. Yet was he loved. He walked upon the bones of England, sought solace in farms and hid in the crowns of trees, and all of nature shadowed him. His enemies sifted the land, and still his face was not revealed. It is my love of him bleeds when I speak out loud. He has stood in a fall of rain, while Cromwell's men sang psalms against him and did not venture in. He has seen women sink to their knees and then raise their hand in blessing. My husband desires a sign, but for all his reading of Revelation, I say heaven admits its own, and it is him. The jaw straps tighten. The changeling prince vanished to France. Dead winter dismembers us. Christmas consumes its own bright fire and blazes by its absence. There is too much law to live by, and I have torn my face in two by swallowing silence. My husband leads me through the marketplace as the village women gape. Genetics. My father's in my fingers, but my mother's in my palms. I lift them up and look at them with pleasure. I know my parents made me by my hands. They may have been repelled to separate lands, to separate hemispheres, may sleep with other lovers, but in me they touch where fingers link to palms. With nothing left of their togetherness but friends who quarry for their image by a river, at least I know their marriage by my hands. I shape a chapel where a steeple stands, and when I turn it over, my father's by my fingers, my mother's by my palms, demure before a priest reciting psalms. My body is their marriage register. I reenact their wedding with my hands. So take me with you. Take up the skin's demands for mirroring in bodies of the future. I'll bequeath my fingers if you bequeath your palms. We know our parents make us by our hands. This is a poem which I wrote after reading Vanity Fair by William Thackeray. And in it, he tells us that one of the characters, Amelia Sedley, writes a letter to George Osborne, who has loved Amelia for many years, but she's never really repaid his affections. And then when he finally tells her he's had enough and disappears, she realizes what she's lost really in the wonderful figure of William Dobbin. And so we're told that she writes him a letter, but Thackeray doesn't tell us what it says in the letter. So I thought I would write the letter. Vanity Fair. Dearest William, I could begin by hoping you are well in England, and I do, now that the regiment has returned to Chatham. Or I could begin by telling you that reports of worsening weather here are true, that Georgie thinks you wicked and unkind for leaving him that your former servants pine, or that father, though no better, is no worse, etc. But this is not a weather talk sort of letter. The whole house sleeps, even Becky, and I am kept awake 6 weeks by your crippling absence. An irony, I confess, since for all your years of passionate presence, I failed to cherish you. Now that you're gone, Becky, and you were right about her all along, keeps dreadful company. Boorish men who jest and drink and flirt, and she isn't in the slightest shocked by any of it. I keep to my room. I have turned the portrait of George face down on the dresser. I have folded the gloves you left in an innermost drawer, as though they were a gift. Since you spoke of my incapacity for love, I have come to see how my own fierce widowhood was a shell against the world, a kind of carapace made up of pride, stupidity and cowardice, a stay, if you will, against the kind of attachment such as yours for me deserved. Poor shredded raiment, for if it did not keep me warm, it kept me safe against you and safe against myself. Last year, at the opera, it was Dido and Inez, I wished to take your hand in a sudden, artless, harmless way that would not give you pause, then didn't. I think I must have sensed the charge built up from a decade's loving in your fingers, though there you sat, as solid as an anchor, and feared that touching it would knock me flat. Now I'm scared I shall die without it. Dear Dobbin, come back. Like everything else we do in our mingled, muddy lives, this letter is overdue. Forgive me if my love arrives belatedly, but there is a ship can get you here by Friday, and come all the rain in Christendom, I shall be waiting for you by the viewing platform. Dearest William, put out to sea. Yours, Amelia Sedley. This is a poem for my son when he was very small and very wakeful. We lived on the north shore of Belfast Lock for many years, and that's the house that he kind of came to consciousness in and learned language in. And I would come in at 10 o'clock and he would still be awake in the summer months when we had the long light. And I asked him once why he hadn't gone to sleep yet, and he said he was waiting for the lighthouse beam from the Copeland Islands to come on, because it shone through his window and they used to have conversations. And so I wrote this for him at that age. Lighthouse. My son's awake at 10, stretched out along his bunk beneath the ceiling, wired and watchful. The end of August. Already the high-flung daylight sky of our northern solstice dims earlier and earlier to a clouded bowl. His Star of David lamp and plastic moon have turned the dusk to dark outside his room. Across the loch, where ferries venture blithely, and once a cruise ship, massive as a palace, inched its brilliant decks to open sea, a lighthouse starts its own night-long address in fractured signalling. It blinks and bats the swing ball of its beam, then stands to catch, then hurls it out again beyond its parallax. He counts each creamy loop inside his head, each well black interval, and thinks it just for him. This gesture from a world that can't be entered. The two of them partly curtained, partly seen, upheld in a sort of boy talk conversation no one else can hear. That private place, it answers, with birds and slatted windows. I've been there. And staying at Belfast Lock, I think that's the place where my spirit is anchored anywhere in the world. It's anchored to the North Shore of Belfast Lock. And this goes back to 1911, when the shell of the Titanic had been put together using 1 million rivets. And it goes back to the launch, when that shell of the great ship was successfully launched into the waters of Belfast Lock, and then it was tugged round to the dry dock and completed over the next year before it set sail for Southampton in 1912. And so I wanted to kind of reenact that slide into the water in language. And I've called the poem the Millihelen, which is a fanciful unit of measurement. So if Helen is the face that launched 1,000 ships, a millihelen, as in milliliter, is the amount of physical beauty required to launch a single ship. The millihelen. It never looks warm or properly daytime in black and white photographs, the sheer cliff face of the ship still enveloped in its scaffolding, backside against the launching cradle, ladies lining the quay in their layered drapery, touching their gloves to their lips, and just as they that go down to the sea in ships rises from choir boys' mouths in wisps and snatches, and evil skitters off and looks askance for now. A switch is flicked at a distance, and the moment swollen with catgut about to snap, with ice picks, hawk's wings, pine needles, eggshells, bursts, and it starts. Grandstand of iron, palace of rivets, starts moving, starts slippery, sliding down, slow as a snail at first in its viscous passage, taking on slither and speed, gathering in the atlas-capable weight of its own momentum, tonnage of grease beneath to get it, waterborne tallow, soft soap, train oil, a rendered whale. This last the only millihelen, her beauty slathered all over the slipway. Faster than a boy with a ticket in his pocket might run alongside it, the bright sheet of the lock advancing faster than a tram. Heavy chains and anchors kicking in lest it outdoes itself, straining up to a riot of squeals and sparks, lest it capsizes before its beginning, lest it drenches the aldermen, and the ship sits back in the sea as though it were ordinary, and wobbles ever so slightly, and then it and the sun-splashed tilted hills, the railings, the pinstripe awning, in fact, everything regains its equilibrium. And as I read a poem for my son, I'd like to read a poem for my daughter. And this is when she was a bit older than he was in the Lighthouse poem. She's about 6 in this. And we were driving along, and she was sitting in the car with me, and she talks a lot. And so she suddenly started to tell me my life as she understood it through the bits and snatches of conversation that she'd overheard. And it was so funny because she was really interested in really minor details and completely uninterested in major life events. So I thought I would continue with the story of my life according to my daughter. And this is my life according to you. So I was born and was small for ages, and then suddenly a cardboard box appeared with 2 furry black ears sticking out of it. It made me nervous, but I was brave and gave it a bell to play with, and then out it jumped and loved me. It was my cat. I called it Morrissey. It matched my mother's Morris Minor. For the next bit, I was a teenager, and then I grew up. I had a flat in Dublin and a boyfriend. He was a vet. Little bed, little kitchen, little tower rack, lots of little cups and saucers. And then off he went to Africa. He sent me pictures of giraffes and of the second tallest waterfall in the world. When he got back, he wasn't my friend anymore. I cried for a week. I was also at university, a bigger place than school with bigger chairs and desks. And when it finished, I found a suitcase. It was red with purple flowers. It had a scarf around the handle. I put in everything I needed, socks and jotter and snacks, and took a plane across the ocean to Japan to visit Godzilla, where it was summer and boiling hot, and the people all kept wind chimes to make it cooler, and rode bicycles to the shops, and at the same time held up umbrellas, though it wasn't even raining. And when I met a man in a bright white classroom, the darkest parts of our eyes turned into swirls, then question marks, then hearts. So we got married and went hippity hoppity splat. A mountain, a lake, a desert. We bought a house, a tiny one at first, and then a massive one. A baby knocked at the door one night, but didn't come in. And then another baby came. He cried a lot. We thought he had a tummy ache. We gave him a bath in a bucket. He was just lonely for his sister to come and keep him company. But you were still floating about in space inside your bubble egg. It had accessories, a switch for going sideways, a switch for going upside down or faster. It was a cross between a sparkly green and a sparkly silver. The moon was very annoying. And then whenever we'd all been bored on our own for long enough, down you came on a path of lightning to finish off the family. You were born on the living room floor at 3 a.m. in front of the trampoline sofa, and I heard them say, "A girl," and sat up straight away. We were both pretty, and I opened out my arms, and that's it, really. When you grow up, I'm going to be so busy taking you to the house shop, waiting by the playground gates to bring your children swimming. I won't be any different. I'll keep your room exactly as it is for you to visit. Bric-a-brac collection on the shelf, the bed your father built, the letters of your name in neon appearing on the ceiling when it's time. And I'd like to finish the reading with the final book in Found Architecture. So I opened with the first one and I'll end with the final one. And this is a kind of homage to an amazing genius engineer from 13th century Eastern Anatolia called Ismail al-Jazari. And there was a beautiful book which he created from 1206 called The Book of Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices. And it's full of useful engineering knowledge and inventions. He invented many of the things which were foundational to engineering. He also invented the first accurate solar clock. So he was extremely useful and a visionary. But what I love about so many of his inventions is the bits of them that are completely unnecessary. They're over the top. They're full of extraneous beauty just for its own sake. And for me, it's the way his practice was balanced on the fulcrum of beauty and use that makes me kind of want to adopt him as a presiding artistic spirit. So this is for him, and it's called From the Book of Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices. Just as the world to Al-Jazari was a wonder of Tawhid, all visible things the uber florid signature of God, so is his book a wonder of understanding of what can be borne up and what will topple, given gravity, air pressure, time, which is itself encased in stunning script. Bical poured into a single shell or glass receptacle. Inventor of such leaps in engineering as the camshaft, crankshaft, throttling valve, the calibration of orifices, and the balancing of static wheels. Theophanies that awed all Anatolia, upon which our modern day buoyancy depends. He was also fanciful, elaborate, absurd, who made water issue from the fountain head in the shape of a shield or like a lily of the valley. Flick open his pages and listen to the clicking of dismantled humanoid automata reconstructing themselves from the bottom up, then stepping back from the task accomplished. A towel proffered, a wine cup filled, the victim of phlebotomy distracted. Close over the flyleaf and watch what fades. Enamel the colour of a peacock feather, roundels, falcons, anklets, diadems, bells. Fripperies of fine technology he stacked in Saladin's palace workshop solely for themselves, which is like waking slowly of one's own accord, the dream world oddly tilted at one's feet, for ages, for a year, until it almost vanishes, leaving the ghosted impress of its ardour still folded in the bedclothes. Thank you very much. Thank you.